If you are self-employed, you may have wondered whether you actually have to pay trade tax. I create these videos, and this entire channel is particularly aimed at solo self-employed individuals, that is, freelancers and traders. Honestly, that is already the most important question you need to answer. Are you a freelancer or a trader? I have already made an in-depth video on this topic, which I will link for you here in the top right. That means, if you are not exactly sure whether you are actually a freelancer or a trader, take a look there first. Next message for everyone. You can actually end this video now and invest your time more wisely, because you definitely have nothing to do with the trade tax. All freelancers are fundamentally exempt from trade tax and are also not required to submit a trade tax declaration. For traders, it is a bit more complicated, as traders are generally required to submit a trade tax declaration. However, this does not necessarily mean that they must also pay trade tax. We will now take a detailed look at how this works. It is interesting to know about the trade tax that it belongs to the municipalities. This means that you pay your trade tax to the municipality where you have essentially registered your business. This is often at home for self-employed individuals. This means having an address, both a private and a business address, and you pay the trade tax there. If you live somewhere different from where you work, you will always pay the trade tax to the municipality where your business is registered. This is interesting, as you don't receive trade tax assessment from tax office. You don't transfer trade tax advance payment or final payment to tax office, but always to municipality. However, I would like to add that some municipalities have essentially outsourced the entire administrative effort related to the trade tax to the tax office. This means that you do have to deal with the tax office, but in the vast majority of municipalities in Germany, you deal with your municipality and not with the tax office when it comes to trade tax. This is interesting because the municipalities have an influence on how much trade tax you pay. This means that the trade tax is not the same everywhere in Germany, but varies from municipality to municipality. Generally, in large cities, where the infrastructure is better, where the connections are better, and where the overall location is more advantageous, you pay more trade tax than, for example, in rural areas that are structurally weaker. It can sometimes make sense for you to be registered in a rural area and pay the trade tax there, rather than in a large city where you have higher trade tax obligations. Basically, you pay your trade tax based on the profit of your business operation, that is, on your self-employment. This does not mean, as with income tax, that all types of income are added together. Rather, only the income from business operations is considered here. And it is also important to know that you have a tax allowance. This means you can make a profit without trade tax, which means you can first deduct from your business profit. And this is the basis on which you start calculating the trade tax. If you fall below this threshold, you must submit a trade tax declaration, but you do not have to pay any trade tax. To understand how the entire calculation and the amount of trade tax works, it is best to look at an example where we go through this calculation step by step. The decisive factor is always the trade tax assessment amount. This means you always need to calculate the trade tax assessment amount first. And when you have this trade tax assessment amount, you multiply it by a multiplier rate. This multiplier rate is exactly what varies from municipality to municipality. This means that your municipality has a different multiplier rate than, for example, the municipality where I operate. You multiply this trade tax assessment amount by the multiplier rate of your municipality. And that results in the trade tax that you actually have to pay. Let's assume that I made a profit last year with my self-employment, with my trading activity, and that is the starting point. That is my profit for now. However, I can deduct the aforementioned allowance from that on which I never have to pay taxes. This then results in my taxable income for the trade tax. I need to multiply this taxable income from the trade tax by 3.5%, which in my case amounts to 892.50. And that is exactly the trade tax assessment amount with which I can continue to calculate. You then multiply this trade tax assessment amount by the assessment rate of your municipality where you are based. And these assessment rates, which vary in Germany, range from 200% to 500%. The legislator has set a range for what the municipalities are allowed to do. And yes, you can expect between 205 and 100%. I have linked a website in the video description below where you can find all the municipalities listed. This means you can also find your assessment rate there to calculate the trade tax. For example, I had a trade tax assessment amount of 892.50, and I am based in Berlin, where the multiplier, at least for this year, meaning in 2022, is 410%, and 892.50 times 410% is the trade tax that will also appear on my trade tax assessment notice and that I must pay to the municipality. Now that you know how much trade tax you have to pay, the question certainly arises, when do you actually have to pay it? In this regard, trade tax is not really different from income tax or value-added tax. This means that the same deadlines apply for the tax declaration. I have previously recorded a separate video specifically on the topic of deadlines for the tax declaration. I'll link that for you up here on the top right. But you can remember that in principle you have 7 months. This means that if you prepare your trade tax declaration yourself, you must submit your trade tax declaration by the end of July of the following year. You can do this online, for example, through Elster or other tax software. If you have a tax advisor or are a client with us, then you have a tax advisor, but you also have a bit more time. Specifically, you have 14 months. Then the trade tax declaration must always be submitted by the end of February of the year after next. For example, the trade tax declaration for 2021 must be submitted by the end of February 2023. But also with trade tax, similar to income tax, you must make quarterly advance payments if your trade tax liability exceeds a certain amount. The dates are there, but a little different. What you should remember are the 15th of February, the 15th of May, the 15th of August, and the 15th of November. These are the respective deadlines for the advance payment of trade tax for the year 2001. The amount of trade tax you need to pay in advance is usually stated on your last trade tax assessment notice. That was essentially the most important thing you should know about trade tax. However, if you are a trader and you have watched the video up to this point, then I personally want to say that I am very glad you have stayed with it for so long. But maybe you're thinking, wait a minute, that's really unfair. Freelancers don't have to pay any trade tax, and I'm supposed to pay thousands of euros a year in additional trade tax. That's really unfair. Yes, you're right. It is more work. However, the financial burden is actually lower in reality, as you can offset the trade tax in your income tax declaration up to 4 times the amount of the trade tax assessment base. This means that you can offset up to 4 times the amount of the trade tax assessment, and as a result, you simply pay less income tax. Therefore, it can generally be said that freelancers do not pay trade tax, but they do pay more income tax. The quadruple means 400% of the trade tax assessment amount, which you calculated earlier. Then there is a multiplier from the municipality, and the quadruple corresponds to 400. This means that if you live in a municipality where the assessment rate is not higher than 400%, you can offset the trade tax 1-to-1 against your income tax liability. For example, if you live in a municipality like I do in Berlin and the rate is higher, 410% in Berlin, then those 10% are indeed exactly what you actually have as an additional tax burden. At this point, however, an important note: the quadrupling of the trade tax assessment amount was introduced during the corona pandemic. Previously, it was 3.8%. As of today, I cannot say whether it will remain at 4 times the amount after the corona pandemic or if it will be reset to 3 times the amount. This means that if you are watching the video now and the video is a bit older, make sure to check again if there might be an update regarding whether it still counts as 4 times or only 3.8 times. I hope that with this video I have given you a good overview of the entire trade tax topic and that you now have a rough idea of how it is calculated and whether you need to pay it. I know it can all be quite confusing and a bit dry as well. I hope it wasn't too bad. If you say, I don't want to deal with this in my everyday life at all, then just hand it over to a tax advisor or take a look at our other videos first. For example, this one.